Hello everyone, welcome to Vacation 2020. My name is Marta and since last year I coordinate the project. Sadly, due to the pandemic, we couldn't host young people from Europe in our beautiful twin city this year. That's why we decided to organize a special online workation. It doesn't matter if you have already been a participant in our youth exchange in Görlitz-Gorzelec in the past 12 years, or it's your first time with our workation community. Simply join us if you want to learn something new, meet new people, or become a part of our European family. For the next 2 weeks, we prepared an online program with different workshops and meetings, so check out our schedule. I'm sure everyone will find something there for themselves. If you have any questions regarding the organization or the program, feel free to contact us. We are happy to help. Right now, I'm in front of the European Center Memory Education Culture, which is located on the former Stalag 8A site. Join us for an online guided tour on the grounds of the memorial site. This is the best opportunity to get to know the history of Stalag 8A and experience this place almost live. Have a nice evening and see you soon again!
Thank you, Marta, for officially opening this year's edition of our project Workation, which some of you may know as WorkCamp. And I would like to introduce myself when I take over from Marta now. And after that, I'd like to invite you to come with me on a tour on this memorial grounds of the former prisoner of war camp Stalag 8A. My name is Ola. Some of you may know me because I was part of WorkCamp, later Workation, from 2012 to 2020 today, with an exception in 2016. And I'm very much looking forward to meet and see a lot of you guys who were part of this project for so many years and who also were part of building this memorial site with us in European cooperation. Now we are inside the European Center of Remembrance, Education and Culture, which was opened here on the former campsite grounds in 2015. Some of you may remember Stalag 8A from the days when there was no center and we came here by bus with all our tools in the bag and we worked here in this somewhat forgotten forest, so it seemed. But thanks to your work and all the work of also our Polish and German partners, we were able to establish this house. So what is Stalag 8A? Stalag 8A is a German prisoner of war camp which was placed here in Görlitz during the Second World War. You can see where Görlitz is located here on the map. Stalag, in fact, is a short form of Stammlager, which means it was a prisoner of war camp for normal soldiers who were put here. And there were different kinds of prisoner of war camps. The Germans had the camps for officers and also Dulags, Durchgangslager, which is a term for a camp which was built up, only tents, for a temporary time. And then again, it was taken somewhere else. And the whole story of Stalag 8A here in Görlitz started with this kind of Dulag, with this temporary camp and tents. And the first prisoners, of course, were Polish prisoners who were taken here to Görlitz. And they were put in these tents called Nürnberger Zelte. And they were forced to come here and to build Stalag 8A. In Stalag 8A there were about 120,000 soldiers who were taken prisoner here from 1939 to 1945. This prisoner of war camp was one of the biggest prisoner of war camps in the Third Reich, and there were soldiers kept here from all over the world. You can see here where they came from, how many soldiers came here from which country. And here you can also see the layout of this prisoner of war camp. The prisoners were not only held captive in Stalag 8A, but they were forced by the Germans to work as forced laborers. After the First World War, the international allies added an article into the Geneva Convention to protect prisoners of war. So the prisoners had certain rights, and they should, if they would work, they should get money for that, for example. This was one of their rights, and they did, but as you can see here, they got, in comparison to a German worker who did the same work, they got far less money, and from that money they had to give 2/3 as a Stalag participation. So they had to, you could say, pay for food and accommodation. And of course, this was not any kind of real accommodation, because they had to live in the barracks, which were made for about 150 soldiers, but by the end of the war were populated by sometimes more than 300 soldiers. They were sent to work, and they were visible everywhere in Görlitz. And so, as you can see here, it's a list of only a few places where prisoners of war worked during 39 and 45. And here we have an example of Pierre Angelroth, a Belgian who was a prisoner of war here in Görlitz, and he made a calendar from each day of his life as a prisoner of war. And as you can see, he, in the orange part, he was first kept here in Stalag in a barrack, and then he was sent to work in Görlitz, and he had to deliver coal into the cellars of the Germans. And sometimes, as you can see, he had to come back here to Stalag, and then again lived in a barrack. And he was unfortunate enough to have been here the whole war as a prisoner for more than 5 years. The racial ideology of the National Socialists in Germany also applied to their prisoner of war camps, which means that they treated the prisoners differently. That meant that the Allied troops were treated a bit better than the troops from Eastern countries, and it also meant that the troops from the USSR were treated the worst. The soldiers from the USSR were kept separately, and they were closed off from the rest of Stalag, and they were also not able to take part in any cultural or sport activities, as the Allied soldiers were, according to the Geneva Convention as well. So the Germans didn't treat the soldiers from the East according to the Geneva Convention, because they said that Stalin didn't sign it, and that's why they just treated them differently. This means that these soldiers were kept in the most populated barracks. As I said before, they had no opportunity to take part in any cultural and social activities with the rest of the soldiers. They had to do the hardest work. They got the worst food, and so on and so forth. This led to a very high mortality rate in this part of the camp. Sadly, we don't know much about all the soldiers. We have a list of about 100 names of soldiers we know who died here in Stalag at 8A, and they were buried in a mass grave behind the camp. But we also know that there probably are about 10,000 soldiers who are buried behind Stalag 8A. What's even worse, most of them did not have the chance, after they were freed by their own army, did not have the chance to get home. Some of them were taken to gulags in their home countries. We are now on the outskirts of Stalag 8A, where the soldiers of the USSR army have been buried in a mass grave. other soldiers who died during their captivity here in Stalag 8A in Görlitz and the region were mostly buried on local cemeteries and sometimes even exhumated and brought back to their home countries or stayed here in this region. There is still a lot we don't know. We have some information about a few prisoners, but there have been so many prisoners and people here, and we are dependent on the information of the families and also on doing more research, which we try to enforce. But still, as I said, there's a lot we have to uncover of the history of this place. We are now in the middle of Stalag 8A. And we are here on the grounds of the night toilet. Each barrack had a night toilet from each side, and the barracks were about 12 meters wide and 60 meters long. And as I said, there were for 150 soldiers, which meant that the hygienic conditions in these barracks and in the camp were horrible, because there were too many people in such a small barrack. They had not enough water to wash themselves, their clothes. They had to wear their uniform all the time to be able, so that the other people are able to recognize them as prisoners of war when they were working in the city in public. And here, this toilet we uncovered during the last 2 years of workation, which is a huge deal for us because we found a lot of personal items of prisoners of war which tell a few stories, and that is very important for us to remember the people who are here, who are victims of the Second World War. Stalag 8A was liberated on the 8th of May in 1945 by the Red Army, and only those prisoners of war were left behind who were too ill to be taken on the so-called Death March to the west. On this march in the direction of the west, the prisoners were liberated by the Allied armies in different places. After the end of the war, this prisoner of war camp suddenly was no longer in the city of Görlitz, but this part of Görlitz became the Polish city of Zgorzelec. So, in this time, it almost in the 1950s, in the 1960s, what happened here was almost forgotten if it wouldn't have been for a Polish history teacher who settled here in Zgorzelec and who tried to collect facts, to get to know former prisoners and to establish this memorial site. This Polish history teacher was Roman Zgubicki, who started this memorial site, which became an official Polish memorial site in the 1960s. At the same time, more or less, at the German side, there was an author, Hannelore Lauerwald, who also was interested in the history of Stalag 8A and interviewed a lot of prisoners, also got to know them and published about it. In the beginnings of the 2000s, the founder of our society, Meeting Point Music Messiaen, came here to Görlitz because he was interested in a certain prisoner who was also kept here in Stalag 8A, namely Olivier Messiaen. He was a composer who composed the quartet For the End of Time here, which is nowadays very well known in the world of classical music. And this piece of music and his interest in it sparked a German-Polish cooperation and sparked the idea not only to establish a memorial site, a working memorial site, but also establish this European center where young people can meet, can learn about history and get to know each other. Nowadays, Germans and Poles work hand in hand to develop this place further and to keep the memory of the victims of Stalag 8A. Thank you for watching, and for more information on Stalag 8A, please check out our homepage. There you can find a lot of literature about this memorial site and about the history of Stalag 8A. And check out our program and join our first workshop on Sunday at 6 p.m.